Hey guys, good morning, Sunday. Um, I want to talk to you about this story. A lot of people know about this story is Moses when he takes the people of God out of Egypt and brings them to the promised land, New Canaan. And but let me go to the middle of the story in Exodus 13, verse 17 and on, where now the people of God are already past the water. You know, the story of the water divides in two and they cross. Um, and before I continue, I'm going to tell you that we can predict what God is. We can predict what God's going to be, and we know what God was because He doesn't change. He's the same. He's constant. He's the same in the past, and today, and in the future. But I'm going to give you an example of the way God works in three different examples. Jesus Christ was preaching and was thousands of people surrounding him, listening to his lecture. And somebody came up to Jesus and told him, "Hey, your friend Lazarus is dying. He's sick." And Jesus Christ says, "Okay, I'm on my way." But he didn't go right away. He kept preaching. He actually did another miracle in between. He saved some little girl. But when he got there, Lazarus was dead, and his Lazarus' sister says, "If you would have been here, he wouldn't have died." And that was because she knew what the power of God, the power that Jesus Christ had, but it wasn't God's plan. His plan was to let him die and now show the people the power of God, and told Lazarus while he was in his tomb, come out, and he came back to life. And then he ordered them to take off all the wraps of the embalmment and give him some food because he must be hungry. He's been dead for 3 days. Another example is a woman that she's been sick for over a decade, and or a little bit more than a decade, and Jesus Christ was preaching. Thousands of people were around him trying to get close to him, and this lady didn't want to bother him, and so she just touched a little bit of his clothing and she got healed on spot. And Jesus Christ stopped everything and says, virtual came out of me, somebody's touched me. And the apostle says, "Wait a minute, Jesus, there's a lot of people touching you right now that want to be close to you." He goes, "No, this one's different." And that was a quick miracle that happened. But listen to this last example. The apostle Paul, everybody knows he's one of the best preachers and writers of the New Testament. And he was preaching. He got stung by a snake. Nothing happened to him. He was shipwrecked and nothing happened to him. And he even prayed to God, and dead people came to life. And whatever he asked God, it went through. Now he's asking God for him. Since he's got a direct connect with God, he goes, "Oh, I know God. He's gonna hook me up." So he asked God, "Hey God, I got this pain. I can't take it no more. It's bothering me. I'm older man, and this doesn't let me live. It doesn't let me sleep. It's bothering me." And God says, "Nah." So he prays again, another occasion, and asks God, "God, this is driving me nuts. I can't stand this pain." And God says, "Nah." And maybe he thinks to himself, "I should pray harder." So he prays to God harder and says to God, "God, I can't stand this pain. It's dry. It's killing me." And God says, "Nah, I'll keep you the way you are. My grace is sufficient, and I like you the way you are because you're closer to me. You pray harder. You're more spiritual." So see the difference in these three miracles. It's not what we want and when we want. This is how it happens. So God doesn't work the way we want him to work because he has the original plan of what's going to go on. So when Moses was he ran away from Egypt because he killed a Egyptian that was hurting a Hebrew man. He ran away and he made a plan where I'm going to forget about Egypt. I'm never going back there. And he got married and he worked for his father-in-law with his sheeps, helping him out. And that was his plan for the rest of his life. So, but that wasn't God's plan. And God called him and told him, hey, Moses, you're going to go back to Egypt and you're going to tell the Pharaoh, you let my people go. And I'm going to direct them to the promised land. That's it. That's what Moses heard. And he goes, okay, let's go down there. So he takes God's people, the Israelites, and leads them towards the promised land. But what God didn't tell him in that first appearance, that the specifics of the trip, what's going to happen during the trip, how long it's going to take. So this trip at normal speeds at that time would have probably taken 40 days, but this trip took 40 years. Why? God didn't want to bring him directly because, first of all, if he took him directly, he had to go through the Philistines, and there was going to be warriors there, and they had to fight, and that wasn't in God's plan. That wasn't his concern. He wanted to train these people on something else, so he took them in a circle, and probably they went around in circles. I don't know why they didn't see that same rock, that yellow rock that was on the right and the purple rock that was on the left. I made that up. But they went around in circles for 40 years before they got to the promised land. And during those times, well, at the beginning, they ran out of food. So now they ask God for food. And in the morning when they wake up, they find this manna. They call it manna, and what manna means is, what is that? Because they didn't know what that was in the ground. So they picked up all this manna, and they had to work. It's not just you're gonna take bread from the ground and you're gonna eat it. They had to process it. They had to work with that manna to get to where they wanted to turn it into bread, that wheat into bread. So it's not just a fast blessing. You had to work for it a little bit. You gotta, make that food. It's like when you buy food at the supermarket, you're not just gonna eat the raw meat. You're gonna have to cook it. God didn't tell Moses what was the specifics of this trip. And sometimes, going back to us, we have our lives. We have a plan of what we're going to do in the future. At least we think we have a plan of what's going to happen in the future, and if it's going to happen or not. So, but that's something that we don't have. Only God has control of the future. God gives us permission for the day. The day we're awake, we're alive. You don't know your future. God knows your future. So, and he gives us that control of the today. Have control today. Make the whole day is going to go on. You plan for that and do it efficiently. So now like I said, we're only equipped for today's plans, not for tomorrow's. And only God is the one that has that control. Now, can you give that control that you think you got to God? And if you do, guess what? Your plans of the future, God has them in his hands already. So if you put all that energy and give it to God, everything else is going to be sweet with your plans, with God's plans for you. In that text that where Moses is talking to God and God gives him that final destination, and doesn't tell them, what it's gonna look like in between. Because if not, they would have just said, "Nah, we're gonna stay here in Egypt, and we don't want to go." But and so he got their hopes up. They all left, and blah blah blah, and that's what the story is about. Everybody knows the story. But there is a blessing at the end of that, future plans of God for the people of Israel. There's a blessing at the end, but God slows it down to teach you, because He just can't give you the blessing on spot. It's like you taking you have a car. It's a nice car, and you say, "I'm going to give it to my son," but my son is only 10 years old. You can't give that car to your son at 10 years old, because he's not old enough to drive. He could probably crash it or hurt somebody else or destroy the blessing. That's the same thing what God did. God didn't want to send him directly to Egypt, to the promised land, New Canaan, because they needed to learn a couple of things before they got there. And one of them was to forget those gods of Egypt and only worship God, and only need one God. So God slows down when He's going to give you your blessing, when He determines it's the right time. So God didn't tell the particulars to Moses and for this trip. And there's a guy that said one time that sometimes a blessing has a negative part of it, and that's it, the learning, because it's like going to school to become a mechanic. You have to take some schooling. You got to take some training. If you don't take the schooling, at least take some training. Learn from somebody else. You just don't become a mechanic from one day to the other. So these are things that are going to help you for your future. And sometimes we think when bad things happen that it's the enemy. But sometimes it's not the enemy. It's your inner me that gets in your way. So if we go to Exodus 16, verse 30, that's when God gives them this manna. And the manna that He's given them, it's, that manna means, what is that in their language? So when you ask God for bread, He sends you manna. You're going to say, what is that? If you ask God for wisdom, and you're going to say, when He sends you to school, what is that? When you ask God for strength, and He sends you to the gym, and not strength doesn't always have to be with muscles, but I'm just using that as an example. When you ask God for a blessing, but you got to work for it, and you ask God for more, you got to work for it. You just can't go outside and, but I got the blessing. No, you have to go out and ask for it, go get it, work for it. So the another name, or what manna means, is when you ask God for something and He doesn't just answer you the way you want Him to answer you, or get you what you want. When you ask God for something, He's gonna give it to you, but He gives you rules. And this is one of the things that God wants you to always serve Him and always need Him and Him only. So He gives you a blessing, but it's only gonna last a certain amount of time. Like that manna, at the end of the day, it went rotten. So tomorrow you gotta wait for God again to give you more, the next blessing. So if that's part of needing God, and God wants you to need Him, and He's ready to give you anything you need when you need it. And don't have to worry about the future. He's got your future planned out. All you got to do is need Him, and He will provide. God bless everybody. I hope you learned something from this story. And I hope you kept something in your heart, even 10% of it. God bless you.